In the conduct of meetings of the General Assembly and certainly of its main committees, member states at the end of the day will be, of course, the ones responsible for the decisions that they're taking. This said, the chairperson or the presiding officer of any such intergovernmental meetings does have some responsibility, some leeway with how he or she manages these meetings to ensure that the work program is carried out in as smooth a manner as possible. For example, if there are meetings of a main committee involving panel discussions, and panel discussions have concluded and the floor is open for interventions, the presiding officer does not necessarily, if he chooses to do so, have to restrict himself to the traditional diplomatic order of giving precedence to member states before NGOs and before the business community. For formal lists of speakers, he needs to abide by the inscription order on the list of speakers. For some of the more interactive debates, presiding officers would have the prerogative as presiding officer to inject some, if they think it would be helpful for the discussions, to inject some different perspectives. They may choose to do so simply by giving the floor openly to somebody, representative of organization X, mixing up, in other words, the information that the secretary will have provided to him or her next to him to remind him of who's asked for the floor. Or at times may say, I think it would be interesting to hear what the opinion of the business sector is on this matter, or what the opinion is of civil societies on this matter. So if I hear no objection, I would now like to invite so-and-so to take the floor. Which is another way of taking a decision, himself or herself, to try to generate an important exchange of views on a given issue. Similarly, when it comes to the overall conduct of a meeting, and certainly when we have lists of speakers, the presiding officer will be reminding everyone, and doing so as necessary on a periodic basis, of the limits for the interventions from the floor. And these limits would have been made known to a committee at the very start of its work in a session and will be available in a program of work. This said, in all honesty, member states either get caught in the moment and keep on talking, talk based on a set, all too lengthy statement that they are periodically reminded not to read from, and that the presiding officer may well request, please, I encourage you to just select some highlights and your statement will be posted on a website in its entirety. Despite these efforts, there are times when everyone goes over the time limit, and the presiding officer, of course, has the prerogative to encourage the speaker to stop, or at times I have witnessed chairpersons who have indeed, in a very polite but firm way, stopped the speaker from continuing, thanking them, and just end of story. Not everyone might be comfortable doing that, but that is a prerogative of the presiding officer in order to not rush things through, but to give, frankly speaking, in all fairness, the opportunity to everyone after that to still be part of that deliberation before we hit the magic hour when the meeting has come to an end. As another example, if we are in a situation in a meeting where action is being invited on a text that the substance of which is diametrically opposite to an existing text before the committee, and the difference may be simply in the word "not," I may, for argument's sake, perhaps move from the General Assembly and just refer to perhaps what can be before another charter body, such as the Economic and Social Council, where there might be a recommendation from a committee subsidiary to the Economic and Social Council to recommend a given non-governmental organization to be granted observer status with the Economic and Social Council. There is a committee that does do that, among other things, is the Committee on NGOs, which is a long-standing committee made up of 19 member states. If this committee, among the many things it may choose to recommend to its parent body, namely the Economic and Social Council, were to recommend that a given NGO be granted status, or perhaps not be granted status, when we get to the stage of the annual high-level discussions of the Economic and Social Council, which will include looking at what, among the many functional bodies and commissions, the Committee on NGOs' recommendations are, if there is a member state or a group of member states in the parent body that disagree with this recommendation, which would simply mean that instead of, for example, having the Economic and Social Council deciding to grant observer status, it would be the Economic and Social Council decides not to grant observer status, there would be a text, a separate new text, submitted by that member state or group of member states, so that the Economic and Social Council, on that given day, in advance, they would know, of course, would have a choice of one or the other. Due to the rules of procedure, we would move to take action on the amendment, which comes first before the existing text, and if there's more than one amendment, in the order in which the amendments have been received, they will be acted upon. When it comes to something so straightforward with the word not, and a body is asked to essentially vote yes or no, it is very important that they understand what they are deciding to agree upon by saying yes or no to. Because it could be confusing that they're agreeing to something that negates an action, and this could be a delicate set of circumstances. So in those instances, the presiding officer should, frankly speaking, and should be advised rather, to make crystal clear to the body of governments before him what exactly they are about to vote on, and what a yes vote would mean versus what a no vote would mean. And again, this is obviously a prerogative of a president. Some may assume that everybody understood. It is therefore really an important responsibility of the secretary to make sure that the president realizes that it is absolutely his right, and it's probably a wise thing to do, to make sure that everybody understands. If for any reason there is an element of such an action that is causing whatever degree of agitation in that room at that moment, it is probably also very advisable to suspend the meeting for 5 minutes, for 15 minutes, because at times, because of time constraints of meetings, some delegations may still be wondering about what they would prefer as a course of action. And a decision one way or the other may mean that we may not need to take a vote, if giving a little more time might help resolve whatever some delegations still are not in agreement on. And if suspending the meeting for a short period of time, perhaps also informally with the input of the chairperson or president himself and other members of the Bureau or other key delegates, would help resolve the matter, it's important that the president do so and then reconvene. At times we have witnessed everything having been worked out. At times it was simply a question of proceeding with a vote, having clearly understood what that vote represents. At times we have also seen situations where a text had what we call program budget implications. That is to say, the content of a text would impact on costs in order to carry out what that text wants. The Secretary General is duty-bound to inform the President, and through the President or through the Chair, that intergovernmental body, if there are or there are not program budget implications on any text that goes before an intergovernmental body. whether they are meetings management costs, costs incurred if you want to hold a special conference 5 years from now, or if there are costs involved in preparing a special meeting, special consultancy needs, or just implying that a given program has to be fine-tuned and modified. Sometimes there are costs, sometimes there are not, but the Secretary General is duty-bound to provide this information. Sometimes the information takes the form of saying, right now, for the current biennium budget, or rather the current budget for the biennium, there are no costs. But when the Secretary General is provided with further details of what you will want from this conference that you wish to hold 5 years from now, when we have that information, we will then come back to you and let you know if there will be costs involved. Either way, whether it's by way of giving this signal, which is done by the Secretary, by reading out an oral statement of program budget implications, or whether there are significant costs involved, in which case a document on program budget implications is issued. There could be times, and there have been one or two that I can recall, where member states were of two minds about whether there should be a program budget implication at all. And therefore, a matter was deferred because the Secretary General's representatives from the department involved were essentially asked to reconsider how they might want to carry out a certain activity that group of governments wanted them to carry out, and perhaps to do so in a slightly different way, in a way that might be deemed a more creative way, but that at the end of the story might be a way that involves less costs and or more sharing with other parts of the UN family. All this to say that even in those instances, there might be the need for a presiding officer to detect that perhaps that body could be invited to take action on this matter, not today, but at a later stage. A later stage could mean a few weeks down the line, could mean at a later session. What that would constitute, nonetheless, would be action on the part of that body, on the part of that committee, on the part of that commission, or on the part of that council. When something is deferred, or when something is to be done at a later stage, that is action in and of itself. Whether then later the council, the commission, the committee will be ready to have a full-fledged draft resolution in which specific elements are delineated and requests are put forward and agreements indicated, fine. But taking no action in and of itself, if action is required, is a form of action.